the end of the day, humanity has more that brings them together than separates them, right? And what is that? The parents love their kids. They want their kids to go to school. They want health care. They want a decent job. They don't want a food basket. They want some autonomy and dignity and hope for their lives. I mean, most of humanity has very similar ideals. And that was what I was able to draw on.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley, in partnership with Leumi Tech, sponsored by Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Turing, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, and in media partnership with CTech. Today, we're going to the U.S. government, and we're going to be meeting Dave Harden, Maryland's first Democratic candidate for Congress. Dave is the managing director of the Georgetown Strategy Group, a Washington, D.C. next-generation firm that leverages talent, technology, and capital to help solve some of the world's most complex problems. In May of 2019, President Trump awarded Mr. Harden the Presidential Award for Distinguished Service, the highest award in the Foreign Service for sustained extraordinary accomplishment in the conduct of the foreign policy. He led a bureau focused on global crisis response and political transition with an annual budget of $4.8 billion and a staff of nearly 1,200 people. He also spearheaded all USAID efforts to respond to global crises and stabilization efforts, including responses in Haiti, Iraq, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, the West Bank and Gaza, and Yemen. Dave Harden, welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. I'm so happy that you're here. How are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here with you too. And you're all grown up now. I remember when you were in middle school, and now look at you. You're all grown up and living at Stanford and being a big shot.
I used to have math competitions with your son, Ryan, all throughout middle school, and he's one of the big reasons why I started loving math. And so it was, I love your family, and, the work that you're doing has always fascinated me. It's really far from the things that I get to do in my day to day. So I'm excited to dig deeper into, your journey over these next 20 minutes, whether it's in the government and USAID and the incredible things that you've been doing in the Middle East, a lot of responsibility in some incredible situations. But also, a little bit in the tech scene and running for Congress. I don't think I ever got to talk to somebody who's running for Congress. Dave, I'm not going to do more justice by iterating on the biography, but I want you to take me throughout your journey and the big milestones, things that really shaped you as a leader in your own domain. What are some of those experiences that now you're reflecting back and saying, wow, those were incredible?
So, the funny thing is, I grew up on a small farm in rural America, and I would have been perfectly happy being a lawyer in a small town. But when I was 16, we had an exchange student from Switzerland he came and lived with us. And it was, in many ways, it was exciting and interesting and difficult because, back in that age, in the 70s, in rural America, having a Swiss student live in your house and go to your high school, it was a very unusual thing, but it opened my eyes to the world. And ultimately, after college, I joined the Peace Corps, and I flew to Botswana, and I started a junior high school, and I was a English teacher, a sports teacher, and I raised chickens, and it was really an extraordinary experience being in Africa in the mid '80s. And from there on, I kind of seized a big world life and adventures, from Botswana to South Asia to Central Asia, and then many, many, many years in the Middle East.
Wow. And so, as you join the government and you're in the Middle East, and you're putting yourself really in places that I can't imagine they're in the comfort zone of growing up in a small place in the United States. Why join then the government and take on leadership positions in the way that you did?
So there were many reasons. I mean, first of all, I loved representing America. I represent kind of the city on the hill, that shining city on the hill, the big vision of America. And not only was it the big vision of America, but it was the generous heart, right? And we can debate American foreign policy all we want, but I think, in my view, since World War II, we've been an overwhelming force for good. And so I was really happy and pleased and honored to represent the United States. But I also, I went in when everybody else was leaving. So if there was a war whether it was in Libya or Iraq or in Yemen or the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, I went in and I had the resources and the teams and the capabilities to mitigate the risks, to reduce conflict, and to basically to alleviate human suffering. And so for me, that was an extraordinary mission that I was able to drive for more than 2 decades.
And so as you're in these very, very difficult places, dealing with some of the most incredible conflicts, especially, the Middle East conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians, working with Gaza as part of USAID, what did you learn from that experience? What was it like dealing, coming in from the United States and seeing this big conflict, but also from a very humanitarian perspective, and at the end seeing the humans down the line on both ends and trying to mitigate risks and help save lives?
Yeah. So I do want to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian element of this, but I also worked in Lebanon. I did a lot on Syria and the Syrian war, and I did a lot in Yemen, including cross-border issues that related to Yemen and Saudi Arabia or the Gulf. And, look, I think at the end of the day, humanity has more that brings them together than separates them, right? And what is that? The parents love their kids. They want their kids to go to school. They want health care. They want a decent job. They don't want a food basket. They want some autonomy and dignity and hope for their lives. I mean, most of humanity has very similar ideals. And that was what I was able to draw on. The other thing that I was able to draw on, I think, look, getting involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the death knell in a bureaucracy and for a political career, right? You end up getting killed. And so what I was able to do is not take a side. I was able to just call balls and strikes, a good American term, right? I just saw it as I saw it, and I reacted the way I understood the facts, and I worked with everybody. And I really tried to find that common ground. And to be honest, most of us had similar ideas on what should be. And when you focused on that commonality of our humanity, it was easier to drive results.
Very, very cool. Now, 20 minutes is not a long time, and I have to talk about something that I'll never get to experience, and definitely a lot of the people watching this, it's sort of like in coding we call this a black box, something that just works, and we have no idea how it works because it's so complicated. You're deciding to run for Congress.
Yeah.
What is that? How does that work?
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm going to find out. All right. So here's literally what happened. So I was a senior foreign service officer for 20 years. I was towards the end of my career, Obama had put me up as the assistant administrator for all complex emergencies in the entire world, and I was confirmed by the Democrats and the Republicans, right? And then when Trump came in, I still stayed on, and I responded to the Yemen conflict, and Trump gave me the biggest award in the Foreign Service. But in 2018, I quit. I opened up my own firm, the Georgetown Strategy Group, and I was happy to be an entrepreneur, doing a lot of the same things that I had been doing my entire life, but this time in the private sector without a layer of bureaucracy over top of me. And by the way, one of the companies that I ran had Israeli American investors and Palestinians in Ramallah who were my software engineers. Amazing. So it was great. I mean, being an entrepreneur was absolutely fantastic. But on January 6th, we were here. I was at the farm. My wife was in D.C., and I heard the attack on the Capitol building. And I was extremely worried for her. And I was extremely worried for America. But even more so, Ryan, your classmate, your friend, was deployed overseas at that time. And he was in Qatar at Al Adid base. And his job then was to keep eyes on America's adversaries, right? The Taliban and ISIS, the Russians, the Iranians, and he was protecting the homeland. And he calls up and he says, Dad, I can't do my job because it looks like America's in the middle of a civil war. It looks like there's chaos at home. And, it was one thing when I traveled overseas. It was another thing when my son was overseas. And That insurrection was fueled in part by Andy Harris, the guy that I'm running against in Maryland's 1st District. You think of Maryland and you think of, basically a moderate state that like makes reasonable decisions. But Andy Harris decided to not certify the Electoral College. He brought a gun into the Capitol that day. He got in a fight in the Capitol that night. He failed to honor the Capitol Police that protected everybody's lives. And I thought to myself, I have worked all over the world fighting for democracy. I have worked all over the world connecting people that have been disconnected from economies and bringing them into the fold. And I can't care about everybody in the world, regardless of language, tribe, ethnicity, religion, race, all of that. I can't care about the entire world and not care about my people. And as I said, I grew up in rural America, and I understood that it was time for me to come home. It was time for me to protect our democracy, and it was time for me to use the same economic skills that I had learned overseas in 20 or 30 years of working overseas and bringing economic opportunity home to my people. And so on January 6th, I decided to run for Congress. It takes a little while to set it up. I officially launched on May 10th, but I'm all in. I'm running for Congress.
Unbelievable. Entrepreneur. Tell me, you're an entrepreneur right now. You were a tech entrepreneur a little while ago, and now you're a different kind of entrepreneur. Tell me about the strategy. You wake up, okay, it's May 10th, it's go time. You now have to win an election. You're running for what sounds like a very, very good cause. You're very, very passionate about it. You have a good product that you're offering, in the tech terms. How do you go to market now? How do you get people to understand who Dave Harden is and really, really understand to a point where they want you to represent them?
So it's a really funny thing because I can easily get on international media to talk about the Middle East. So in the last, say, 3 weeks, I've been on all the major media outlets talking about the Middle East. But to talk about my congressional run, in a little rural area of Maryland is a lot harder to break through in that media cycle. So when I do these big, let's say BBC, I did BBC recently, right? Tens of millions of people are listening to BBC all over the world. There's probably 3 people in my district who are listening to BBC. But they always begin by saying, Dave Harden, you're running for Congress, but tell us about the Middle East. So I need to do a couple things. I need to get visibility. I need to nationalize this race. And to be quite honest, when people talk about the American political system as being broken and rigged, it's kind of true. Right? I'm an outsider. I'm a bit of an insurgent. Even though I was in government forever in the executive branch, I was a nonpartisan. I worked for whoever was in power. If it was a Republican president or a Democratic president, I just served America. And now I have to take sides on 1,000 different issues. I have to kind of break through the political elite structures at the local level. You have to raise an enormous amount of money in order to be credible and viable. And you got to be able to do it all. But the thing is, having run America's responses to some of the most complex crises of this century allowed me to build a team that's fast and agile and responsive and quick. And so I feel very confident about where we are in this election.
And it really sounds like you're approaching this election as some sort of another war or another conflict that you've helped resolve around the world, again, for the benefit of your country, for the benefit of democracy and how you see where things should go. And so how do you keep yourself in check? So, things are moving on a day-by-day basis. You launched exactly a month ago, from what I understand. And how do you sort of keep yourself in check and see, okay, are we improving? What do we need to improve? How do we pivot? Because these are really the questions that every entrepreneur is asking themselves, at least on my street here.
So before I answer the question about how I do it now, I want to spend a moment about how I used to do it. And as you know, I was the longest serving American diplomat in U.S. history in Israel, right? And so how did I keep myself focused and effective through many, many wars when we lived in Israel from 2005 to 2016. Well, what I did is I ran along the beach from Herzliya to Tel Aviv to go to work. And that was a very long run, but it was an effective way for me to be able to focus and to get some rhythm and balance in my life. So I'm a little bit older now, and I don't, in some regards, have a little less time because Tel Aviv is so laid back that you can easily do that, right? But the East Coast is a little less laid back. But I do try to run and focus, and I run either along the country roads or when I'm in DC, I run along the mall. And that helps me kind of think through what I'm doing. I also don't sweat the details, the small things that much. It's easy to get caught up in everything that goes wrong, right? And look, the details matter. It's true. But at the end of the day, that one email or that one tweet or that one, that one speech, it really almost certainly won't have an everlasting effect. And so I think, to keep that in mind, and just to keep, not having perfection be the enemy of the good, that's one other thing that I try to do.
Amazing. Take me a little bit higher now. 30,000 feet in the air, the landscape. What it sounds to me like one of your goals is to make the biggest positive impact possible. Does that work today in the political system? Does that work in the democracy? Is this really where you can really make a strong impact? I'm asking as a young entrepreneur where I see the things that are happening in the tech world, how fast they're moving, and I'm also saying the disruptions that we've been experiencing. Israel, we've been going through 4 elections, maybe 5, hopefully not. What's your take on that?
I mean, I definitely believe that technology is and capital are going to be drivers of massive impact, and I'll explain in just a second. But our political system has to work as well, right? And from an American perspective, if our democracy doesn't sustain itself, if the politics don't work, then everything else is going to fail. I mean, I think our democracy is kind of a foundational principle of our society and our culture and our economic and political success. And so we must nurture our democracy. The other thing from an economic perspective that I'm keenly aware of is that climate change is going to have massive disruptive economic impact. And it doesn't matter if again, where I live, it doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or you think climate change is a hoax. It doesn't matter because the capital markets and the technology have already decided we're moving to climate solutions. And I mean, clearly Israel is at the very leading edge of climate solutions. The question for America and the question for my district is, will we innovate, design, build, and sell the climate solutions to the world, right? Or will we buy from those who do? And so I would like to seize and own that future. I would like to create the incubators, the R&D firms, the marriage of public and private capital to drive those climate solutions. And part of the reason why this is important to me is that I know in Baltimore, where I grew up and is just outside of the district in which I'm running, the steel industry collapsed in the late 70s and early 80s. And when the steel industry collapsed, it was massive, massive catastrophic failure for households, communities, and the surrounding cities. That kind of disruption is happening again, right? This is what climate will do. It will disrupt energy, agriculture, infrastructure, you name it. There's going to be massive changes in our economy. And I don't want what happened in the late 70s and the early 80s to happen again. I would like to learn from that experience and to have the United States be kind of the leading innovator and thinker for climate solutions for generations to come.
I love that perspective. And I want to go back a second. Sweating the small stuff. I think that's something that, as I mature, I'm learning the importance of that. And I think that no matter what leadership position you're in, this is a crucial element. what is your secret sauce? So when you're, especially in a very emotional moment where you're running for Congress, this is a very passionate thing that, requires a lot of emotional involvement. You see these tweets and you see the race and you see the incumbent that you're obviously running against. Well, how do you as a person and as a leader react to that in a common, stable way?
Well, first of all, I think being a leader means that you set up great teams. And that is one thing that I've been able to do, whether it's in government or in the private sector. And so I have people that have been with me who I took many of the people that were in my startup with me into my campaign. And they're from all over the country. And they're all ages too, by the way. I mean, I don't hire a lot of 44-year-olds because they have mortgages and kids in college, right? But I hire 24-year-olds and 74-year-olds, and that actually has worked very, very nicely. So you want to set up good teams. B, at least from where I sit, I've had a big life. I've had an iconic career. If I take a big swing and miss, it doesn't matter. Right. If at the end of the day I lose, I'm going to open up a farm brewery at the farm and we'll be perfectly fine. And I think it's also important, to put all of this in some perspective. I mean, I served and I worked in South Sudan and in Yemen, right? Or the people that were just suffering horribly in Syria. And so when you see their lives and you see the things that they're grappling with, when an email that goes out that has a couple of typos in it that makes you look silly and stupid, you're still alive and you're still running for Congress.
I love that. Dave, thank you so much for these insights, and I'm excited to see where this goes, and I just believe the passion that you're exuding here. I believe how much you love the country, and doing this for the right reasons. I think that's just really, really cool. So thank you very much for coming and sharing this with me. I have a few more questions, not about Congress, not about your professional journey, and I want to take you back a little bit to your childhood. What fascinated you as a kid? Perhaps the subject in middle school or a passion hobby?
So here's a funny thing. When I was a young kid, my dad said, "All right, it's time for you to go out there and earn your money." And he loaned me, I don't know, $50 to go buy chickens. And I bought chickens, and they laid eggs, and then I sold eggs to everybody in the neighborhood, and it was great. I sold them for 5 cents less than what they could buy them in the store. Although if I were smarter, I would have sold them for 10 cents more. But I delivered them to their house, and it was farm fresh eggs, from the farm, and I did that for a long time, enough to buy a horse, which then had a horse, which then I sold and bought a car. So that was my childhood days. Yeah.
It almost sounds like Tom Sawyer. And then a role model, somebody that inspires you or inspired you along your journey, either professionally or personally.
All right. Well, in that age, baseball was everything, and I was a big little league player in baseball. And the Orioles, the Baltimore baseball team, had a third baseman. His name was Brooks Robinson, and he's a Hall of Famer, and he was absolutely great. And I remember being able to meet with him and have a 15-minute conversation about baseball and life. And it was just an event for me that I will never forget, right? This was somebody who was great and big and succeeded in all of his wildest dreams. He came from humble beginnings. And for me, that is something I'll never forget.
Amazing. And what are 3 more or less words that you would use to describe yourself?
Well, I have enormous energy. I bring intense passion into the mix, and I care.
Dave, thank you so much. My regards to the family, Ryan, Waverly, and Tyler, and your wife. And I'm looking forward to meeting in person, and I'm looking forward to following closely. And regardless of what happens, thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing around the world. At the end, it's literally saving lives and improving people's lives wherever you go. So I think that's what I'm leaving here with. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you. Join me at hardenforcongress.com. Harden for Congress.com. We're building the movement to return decency back to Congress. Thank you, Michael. You're all grown up now. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you very much. Take care.